With that, welcome again, Renee. Thank you so much.
Thank you
I'm
very
going to
much.
just kind of like jump in and start with the basics.
Sure.
So, can you break down the key differences between collaborative divorce and mediation in the simplest of terms? I think people get confused exactly what the differences are in terms of intention and process. And what does each process actually look like, kind of more on a day-to-day level?
Sure. So I'll address the first part of the question first about the differences. So collaborative divorce and mediation are both designed to help you and your spouse resolve your divorce amicably and out of court. But there's differences on how they work, who is involved, and what happens if the process doesn't work out. So in mediation, you and your spouse meet with a single neutral third party, and that's the mediator. This person helps you communicate with your spouse and reach agreements on the major issues such as dividing assets, custody, any kind of support, child support, or spousal support. A mediator, though, they cannot give either of you legal advice or financial advice.
Mhm.
So you're generally encouraged to have a separate attorney to consult with outside of the mediation sessions and to review the final settlement agreement once you've reached a final agreement. But these lawyers, they're generally not part of the actual mediation sessions. It's just you, your spouse, and the mediator.
Right.
In collaborative divorce, it's more of a team approach. So you and your spouse each hire your own collaborative law attorney, and there are attorneys who are specially trained to assist with this type of divorce. And the process includes a series of four-way meetings. So it's going to be you and your attorney, your spouse and their attorney, and then if you need any other expertise, such as a financial advisor or a child specialist, maybe a therapist or something like that, then those parties would be part of these meetings as well. And in mediation, if you can't reach a full agreement, the mediator will help you prepare a list of everything that you were able to resolve. So if there's like one outstanding issue, let's say it's concerning dividing an asset that you just can't come to an agreement on, you would still be able to outline for the court that you've reached agreement on the other outstanding issues, but there's just one thing that the court has to decide. And you can use your consulting attorney that you were using throughout the mediation to bring that issue to court. Whereas in collaborative divorce, if you can't come to a resolution, the attorneys that you've hired to assist you in the collaborative process have to withdraw. So they cannot file for you in the court for litigation purposes. You have to start anew with new attorneys. And so it's really like an all or nothing approach. And so the goal there is to really reach a resolution so you don't have to start over.
What a great and thorough breakdown. And I love that you kind of walked through what did you call it? The four,
Four-way meeting.
thank you, approach. And the fact that, what I love about that kind of process of collaborative divorce is that everybody is kind of agreeing to, we are putting out that we want to resolve this in this manner, and we're so committed, whether it is the clients or the professionals involved, we're so committed that if it doesn't work out in this process, you guys have to start fresh, because that's how committed we are to trying to solve this, and to really
Yes.
make sure that everybody's on the same page with their intention. I just got a great question jumped in. Is this collaborative divorce process something that's available, do you know, in all states?
Yeah, I believe generally so. So you can just do a Google search for collaborative law attorneys, and typically each state, like I know for sure in New York and California, I met with a California collaborative law attorney, have organizations that are specifically designed for continuing education for lawyers and other professionals to assist clients with this type of divorce.
So I so enjoyed our last conversation, which is available. Actually, it's going to be probably kicking off season one of my podcast,
Oh, yeah.
which is going to prepare at the beginning of the year. And in that conversation, you talked about that, what we just touched on, the collaborative law participation agreement, where everyone commits to staying out of court. Does mediation have
Yeah.
any similar commitment mechanisms, or can you just jump to mediation more easily? That's the whole idea, and the biggest difference between the two.
Yeah, so in mediation, there's no formal commitment to stay in mediation. You can easily jump to litigation if you feel that it's unproductive.
Mhm.
But then also in mediation, you can feel a little bit less secure because either spouse can decide that this isn't working and move to litigation. Whereas with collaborative divorce, you make that upfront commitment. Um, and I mean, so, and then, but I think with mediation, you have to think about the cost. So if you do have a consulting attorney that you're working with through the mediation process, if it doesn't work out, then you get to keep your lawyer who already has a full understanding of your background and the issues, and then they can easily transition to litigation. Whereas with the collaborative process, you have to start over.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients that I work with who go the mediation route. I always recommend that, obviously, because it's much more humane and cost effective. And I have some who do the collaborative divorce,
Mhm.
and I'm coaching, prepping them both through that. And I think what I really admire about the collaborative divorce approach is when I'm working with clients who are just strictly doing mediation, I'm always advocating you need to consult with a local family law attorney
Mhm.
because that mediator is a neutral third party, right? They're
Mhm.
not working on behalf of either spouse. It's really about working on behalf of the divorce. And when you have that dedicated family law attorney who's consulting on your behalf, they're looking at things through a lens of your best interest, which is great.
Right.
And
Exactly.
the goal, no matter what process you choose, is, the measure twice, cut once, right? Just go through
Right.
thing because in the end you want to walk away feeling like, okay, this was an equitable deal, I can start fresh. You don't want to go back with the woulda coulda shoulda. So having
Right.
on that collaborative side all of the extra
Mhm.
support if necessary, if you have kids, if then you need a therapist or somebody who perhaps can help navigate a different kind of child need who's a specialist, or the financial aspect of that. How does the
Mhm.
professional support compare in mediation? Do you have the same level of expertise available? Do you do mediations or just strictly collaborative divorce?
Mostly collaborative, because I err on the side of I really like to protect my clients' interests. So, like you said, being a mediator, you have to be neutral, and so I really like to advocate for one spouse and reach a fair resolution in that way.
Yeah, I get
But
it. Satisfying.
yeah, but in mediation, so the only professional in the room, the actual land, it could be a virtual room, is the mediator. And so if you need expertise outside of the negotiation, you have to seek that independently and meet with the experts on your own time, and then bring that information back to the mediation, which is fine. So like I do coach clients going through a mediation process. We outline in advance all the issues. I present strategy for them. We have like the best outcome and then the least favorable outcome in their terms, and then like a middle ground so that they have options. And if you could do that with any professional. So if you needed to talk to a financial advisor, you could meet with them, get all the information, and then present it during the mediation. So indifferently from the collaborative process where the additional experts outside from your attorneys are actually in the room, they've reviewed all of the information together, and then they're presenting it in a way that's constructive so that the parties can reach a equitable resolution to certain issues that need to be resolved.
So you actually touch on something that I think is really interesting and it doesn't get talked about a lot, which is kind of like how this process goes, like on the
Mhm.
day, right? So the fact that you brought up the fact that mediation as well as can be in person, it can be over Zoom. The same is true of collaborative divorce. And
Yeah.
so when we're talking about in-person things, I think it's important for people who are in this early stage of research and trying to educate themselves about the different processes to know that whether it's mediation or collaborative divorce, you have the option of everybody's in the room together. And if it's mediation, it's each spouse and the mediator, or it can be a spouse in one room, a spouse in
Mhm.
another room, or a Zoom room, and
Yeah.
the mediator in another one going back and forth. Or,
Yeah.
in mediation, also a spouse and their attorney in one room, a spouse and their attorney in the other room, and the mediator going back and forth. And is that something similar to the collaborative divorce experience as well, in terms of the kind of physically how it goes?
Yeah, I mean, because the commitment is to be collaborative, it's usually generally in one room. So you would all of the professionals as well as the spouses would be together and speaking, but the attorneys are speaking on your behalf. So it's similar to court, where you don't have to, as the client, you're not obligated to speak. Your lawyer is speaking and advocating for you, and you can take breaks and go outside and speak to your lawyer independently so that you can strategize and then come back to the room. But the goal is to cooperate together. So I think that's a key difference.
Completely agree. And I will say the one thing that I do like about both mediation and collaborative divorce is that is always the goal, right? Like it's just, we want to get through this. We want both parties to reach, an equitable solution. And look, cost is a huge concern when you're going through a divorce. That's what I'm all about, saving people time and money by getting them prepared so that they are an active participant throughout the process as opposed to learning on the job, which is
Right.
going to cost you money, and making sure people understand your attorney's your attorney, they're not your therapist. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because otherwise that bill goes up really fast. So based on your experience, how are the costs typically, how do they compare between collaborative divorce and mediation? Are there like hidden costs that people should know about for either process?
Yeah, so in terms of cost effective, I would say mediation is probably more cost effective because you're generally splitting the cost of the mediator between you and your spouse, and it's usually an hourly rate. And since you're only working with one professional, the mediator, there's not an additional expense unless you hire a consulting attorney, and then you would be paying their hourly rate or flat fee, whatever it is. And then also, if you consult outside with any experts, then you would pay them independently. But if you're just working with a mediator, it's much more less expensive than the collaborative process, where you have to hire a collaborative attorney, each of you do, and then if there are any experts needed, you would also have to cover those expenses. You would probably share the cost of the outside experts, so the financial advisor or child specialist, but would independently pay for your attorney. And then in terms of hidden costs, I think in mediation, like I said, it's just consulting outside and paying those additional fees. And then the breakdown, if there's not a full resolution, then you still have to go to court and litigate and pay the expense of the attorney representing you there. And then in collaborative, I think the hidden cost is if it fails, you have to start over. And so you may have spent thousands of dollars on your attorney to represent you in the collaborative process, and then you're going to have to put down a new retainer for your litigator and then cover the expense of litigating. So I think those are things to just be conscious of when you're trying to make a decision.
And just for clarity, when you're going through a divorce, the cost of the divorce itself generally comes out of marital assets, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so it is a joint financial responsibility. Even if you're paying for your own attorney, ostensibly, like that still can come out of community funds, right?
Right.
Yeah,
That's fair.
I think honestly, I do consultations a lot, right? I offer like 10 free consultations a month for people. And
Mhm.
the reason I bring it up is because I think that a lot of people don't realize that, and they think I don't have any money, or I've been locked out of
Mhm.
the checking account. I don't have access to money. So to anybody who's watching this, please know that all of that is still your asset, and it's just really about making sure that you communicate to your attorney that something needs to be filed to make sure you still have access to all of the financials and assets during the divorce process to cover costs like this.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that. So, I come across a lot of people too who struggle with being able to financially afford a divorce. And another thing that's important to know is that you can request, or it's basically like the first hearing, you make the request through a motion. So you would have an attorney, you make the request through a motion. It's called a pendente lite motion, and it basically covers anything that during the pendency of the divorce that you would need to get through the divorce in a fair way. And one thing that you can request is that your spouse, if let's say you didn't have an income during the marriage, but your spouse has resources and can cover attorney fees, you can request that your spouse cover your attorney fees during the pendency of the divorce. And the court will make an interim award, so the court may require your spouse to cover like the retainer.
Mhm.
And then you may have to go back and ask again later if there are additional expenses, but at least you know that your retainer is covered. And so I just want people who are on the fence because they don't have the financial resources to know that there are mechanisms in place in the court system to ensure that there's a level playing field and you don't have to go at it alone without an attorney or get an attorney who's, maybe you think is less than what you need in order to challenge your spouse because the court can award attorney fees.
Honestly, I think this might be the most important thing that we talk about today. I have more questions about collaborative divorce versus mediation, but there are a lot of people who, in most marriages, more often than not, we're dividing up responsibilities, right? So
Right.
more often than not, one person is in charge in finances, and
Mm-hmm.
the person is offsetting that by being responsible for other things. And I do get a lot of, especially, my stay-at-home parents who are like, I'm screwed. I'm
Yeah.
basically screwed. I don't have access to anything. And to be able to like talk them off the ledge and explain this to them, when I'm doing the consultations or working with clients really makes a huge difference. And so this is going to be the clip that I make for social media. Collab with you. um, I love the work that I do, helping people prepare in advance of divorce. And there's so many different, facets of what needs to get done. And the foundation of my coaching program, as you know, there's an emotional side to divorce and there's a business side. And you need to separate the two, but address them both at the same time because money equals feelings,
Right.
and, a big time of uncertainty and change is really triggering and really scary. And so having access to, like with my coaching program, I work with a CDFA, there can be more complex kind of financial situations, like maybe one person owns a business or multiple properties or significant assets that require
Yeah.
like separate valuation, which process tends to handle kind of those more complicated financial situations better, and can mediation really tackle the complicated stuff, or do does it behoove you, like I have the a la carte and so does collaborative divorce, of you can kind of pick and choose adding these kind of work better for people who have complex financial situations.
Yeah, so I think the collaborative divorce team is always going to be better if there are complex finances in the marriage that have to be assessed because you're going to, in order to divide the assets, you have to accurately identify them and then value them. And so you're going to need specialized expertise in that. And in the collaborative process, like you said, you can have the certified divorce financial analyst or a certified public accountant who can do this work for you and then present it during the process. And in mediation, you can attempt to create the same, I guess, process, but you're generally going to have each spouse is going to get their own. So then you're going to have to cover those expenses. And then there may be conflict over agreeing with the other spouse's expert report, right? And so you might as well just be in court at that point because you're not going to necessarily resolve it. And it's if the mediator doesn't have the expertise and they're also supposed to be neutral, they can't choose a side.
Yeah.
And so their goal and their job is to facilitate communication. It's not to provide any kind of advice. And so I really think if you do have complex finances in terms of dividing your assets, it would be better to take the collaborative approach where you can bring in that financial advisor to help guide the discussion.
I think that's great. And for anyone who's listening today and they're thinking to themselves, that sounds really expensive. I don't have money for that. What can I do? I love to remind people that, if you are more in a low income or no income situation, there are options, right? I offer free consultations where I can talk to you and kind of just guide you through with, my advice. So do a lot of other people, but the most important resource you should be taking advantage of if this is you is your local librarian. Activate them to do some research for you about programs in your area that will fit your situation. It's so important. Yes, we can do Google searches, but I'm all for technology, but look, I prefer people, right? Like when you're actually engaging with somebody and you're explaining where you are, you're going to get a lot more nuanced kind of information, and it's going to spark, conversation, and somebody is going to be invested in helping you. So not just good for books in the library, please. one of my favorite places in the whole world. Well, I
Yeah,
know, look, we've blown by the 20 minutes. I usually like to reserve for this. So I'll wrap up with just like one or two more questions,
sure,
just to be
sure.
respectful of your time. We did had somebody drop in that they missed the name of the form to file with the court to be allowed access to the marital assets or finances to help them offset the cost of divorce during the process.
It's actually not a form. It's a motion. It's called pendente lite, and it basically means pendency. And we can, I mean, I guess you'll write it up, right, Alex? I can give you the proper spelling and everything, but it's a motion that your lawyer would make on your behalf to the court once the divorce is initiated, and in that you can request certain things. So, in addition to attorney's fees, you can request exclusive occupancy of your home. So, if you want your spouse to move out, and let's say you have the children, if you're the primary caregiver, you can request exclusive use and occupancy. You can request temporary child support and spousal support. So, all those things that maybe your spouse is threatening you, like, okay, fine, I'm leaving and you're going to get no money and you're going to have to cover all this yourself. Like, no, actually, I can request that these things be paid during the pendency of the divorce, because who knows how long a divorce could last. And the system is set up so that you're not impoverished just because you want to leave your marriage.
I'm like clapping silently so I don't like interrupt you, but that again, there's so many people who come to me and they're scared beyond because they don't have control of the finances. You do have options. This is
Mhm.
why Renee and I do these conversations to
Yeah.
get these messages out there, because it's really, really scary. If you don't have access to those funds, you have options. So I'm going to start wrapping up. And I think the last question I kind of want to ask are about red flags. You always hear about red flags in dating. We're going to talk about them, about people getting divorced. So, look, you and I always talk about litigation should be your last resort, right? Because
Mhm.
with litigation, then a third party is really deciding the terms
Yeah.
of divorce and by extent, like the way your life is going to go after this. But what are like red flags that tell you that neither collaborative divorce or mediation will work? Or what do you recommend, you know, for people in that kind of situation where maybe these two processes don't fit what they need?
Yeah, so both of these processes are based on being able to communicate with each other, negotiate as equals, act in good faith, be fully transparent. So if there are any specific things such as history of domestic abuse, emotional abuse, like a severe power imbalance where like one spouse has control over all of the finances, then it may not be the appropriate process for your relationship, because you really want to be able to have a productive conversation with your spouse in order to reach a resolution. And you don't want to, especially for victims or survivors of domestic abuse, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're in the same room, even if it's through Zoom or something like that, with your abuser, where there's intimidation, and it's likely that a mediator is not going to pick up on it, but how your spouse communicates to you, so you know what they're doing. And then it may come across as you being difficult. And it's not that you're being difficult, it's that you're in a situation where you can't or don't feel comfortable asserting yourself. And so in that situation, if you do end up in that situation in mediation, you can always ask to end the session. Like I always tell my clients that I coach, never feel pressured to say yes to anything. Mediation is voluntary. You don't have to continue with it. If you feel uncomfortable, you can ask for a break. You can say, let's move on to the next issue. I'm done with this part of the conversation. Or you can just say, I'm done for today. Can we schedule another session? I don't want anyone to feel like they have to commit to anything. That's you don't. And if you're in a collaborative process, you will have an attorney who can speak on your behalf. So it's not as if you have to be the one engaging directly with your spouse if they're an abuser. So it's just something to think about. And honestly, the alternative is to go the litigated route if there are those kind of safety concerns or power imbalances. But having an attorney who can truly advocate for you is so important, and you just want to be mindful of that and do a good vetting to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of by attorneys as well,
A
because
hundred.
unfortunately that happens.
Hiring your attorney is one of the biggest financial investments you're going to make during this process. I have a free download 24 questions to ask a divorce attorney or a mediator that you can take to consultations. It's a great
Mhm.
off point. If you're watching or listening to this on Instagram, please drop 24Q in the comments and you'll get a link to download it. And that's all about preparing before. Just jumping back to what you just said, which is so incredibly helpful. There can feel like if you're in a dynamic where there feels like there's a power imbalance, or you're not used to negotiations, right? Like those things can really shut a person down, right? It can make
Right.
the process feel really intimidating. I was actually just working with a client yesterday who is having their first mediation next week. And the week before, I love going through getting comfortable with negotiation and being in the room and what that means. And you touched on some really important tips and tricks, which is you get a voice. And
Right.
if you are uncomfortable and you need to pause things, speak up. If you feel like you don't understand something, raise a hand and ask, for more clarification. If something is being, presented to you that you're feeling that emotional reaction of
Right.
anxiety, fear, you can say, I'm going to need a beat to think about that and I'll get back to you. You can even say, I'll look at the notes after and then get back to you. You never have to make any decision final in the room.
Right.
And I think being able to go in, which is, being able to go into these situations prepared because you've, gone through all of your finances, what your goals and priorities are. You're working with great attorneys like and or coaches like me. What am I doing? Leave
Yeah.
myself out here. Um,
Yeah.
who are going to really prepare you. Again, the whole goal is to put you in a position where you are empowered to become your own best advocate. And sometimes that shows up in the form of you knowing how to pause and
Right.
and not say anything.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
great advice.
Well, look, for somebody who's listening and they're trying to decide between these two options and they want to reach out and maybe work with you, can you
Yeah.
please tell my friends here how they can find you, Renee?
Oh, sure. So, my law firm is Thoughtful Lawyering. My website is thoughtfullawyering.com, and then all social medias is Thoughtful Lawyering. So feel free to reach out. I consider myself a very compassionate person. I love talking to people. So like you can DM me, I offer free consultations. We can just chat and I can give you some guidance on next steps. I really feel like legal advice in terms of family matters should be more accessible, and unfortunately, it costs a lot to just engage with a lawyer, unfortunately, but not for me. And so I really want people to feel as though they could reach out if they have questions.
I love that. And I will be tagging Renee and inviting her to collaborate. So on this reel when it posts immediately after this conversation. But Renee Turner, thank you so much for giving me more of
Oh,
your
thank
time. I
you.
so love talking to you. I really admire the way that you put forth your information across social media and all the wonderful things that you offer. And I'm going to hopefully have another conversation with you soon.
Yay. Thank you so much, Alex. This was great.
Always great to see you. Thank you to everybody who joined us today, and we'll see you next time.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.